The first thing I remember after the stroke was the ceiling. Not my ceiling. Just a ceiling. Fluorescent lights humming above me like trapped insects, the kind of institutional white tiles you never want to wake up to. My right side felt absent. Not painful. Not numb. Just not there. Like half of me had stepped out of the room for a moment. They tell me I was unconscious for 3 days. 3 days my children spent waiting, wondering if Mom would ever speak again. 3 days where my 58-year-old life hung suspended between was and will be. Mom? Can you hear me? That was Karen, my eldest. Always the practical one. Even as a little girl, she'd organize her stuffed animals by size and species. I tried to answer her, but my mouth felt like it was packed with cotton, my tongue a foreign object. What came out wasn't words. Just a desperate moan that scared even me. I remember the panic in her eyes, quickly masked with that efficient smile she uses for difficult clients at her law firm. It's okay, Mom. Don't try to talk. The doctor says you had a stroke. But you're going to be fine. Fine, you know that feeling when someone is lying to you, but they don't realize they're lying? When I was 7, my father told me our dog had gone to live on a farm. It took me years to understand what that really meant. That's how fine felt in that moment. Little did I know that fine would be the beginning of the end of my life as I knew it. And the beginning of something else entirely. In the 3 weeks that followed, I learned all the ways my brain and body had betrayed me. Right side weakness. Aphasia, that's when your words get jumbled up or refuse to come at all. My right hand, once precise enough to thread a needle, now couldn't hold a spoon without trembling. The physical therapist, a cheerfully brutal woman named Denise, would smile as she bent my resistant limbs, telling me I was making wonderful progress while I sweated through exercises that once would have seemed laughably simple. Think of it like rewiring a house, she'd say. Your brain is finding new pathways. But what haunted me wasn't what I couldn't do. It was the way people started looking at me. The careful, measured tones they used, as if speaking too quickly might break me. The way Karen would automatically cut my food without asking if I needed help. The silent glances between my children when they thought I wasn't looking. The day I was discharged, I overheard Karen and my son Michael arguing in the hallway outside my hospital room. She can't live alone, Michael. It's not safe. So what's your solution? Moving her into your spare bedroom? With your schedule? Or maybe you think my 1-bedroom apartment has a magical extra space? What about assisted living? Assisted living. The words hit me like a physical blow. I was 58 years old. Too young to be packed away, too damaged to be independent. I pressed my working hand against my mouth to stifle any sound. The last thing I needed was for them to know I'd heard. To see the guilt and justifications in their eyes. That night, Karen drove me to her home. Not mine. Hers. My clothes had been packed in unfamiliar suitcases. My house, the one I'd picked out with their father 25 years ago, the one I'd kept in the divorce, the one where I'd planted a garden every spring, was being taken care of. Whatever that meant. It's just temporary, Mom, Karen said, her eyes fixed too intently on the road. Until you're stronger. I wanted to scream that I wasn't a problem to be solved. That I was still me inside this broken body. Instead, I managed to say, thank you, the words coming out slurred but comprehensible. The therapist had told me to celebrate small victories. The thing about living in your adult daughter's home is that the parent-child dynamic flips in ways neither of you is prepared for. Suddenly, she's setting rules about when I should take my medication. Scheduling my bathroom times. Cutting crusts off sandwiches I never asked for. Mom, did you do your exercises today? I was sitting in what had become my chair in her living room, staring out at a neighborhood I didn't know. Spring was turning the trees a vibrant green, but I felt disconnected from it, like I was watching it on television. Yes, I lied. What was the point? My right hand still refused to cooperate. My words still tangled themselves when I got tired. And I was always tired. Karen sighed, that little exhale of disappointment she'd perfected as a teenager. The therapist said consistency is key. I know what, the therapist said. Each word required conscious effort, like pushing boulders uphill. She placed a glass of water and 2 pills on the side table next to me. These need to be taken with food. I'll make you some toast. Before I could protest, she was gone, the efficient click of her heels on the hardwood a percussive reminder of all the ways our positions had shifted. I looked down at the pills. Blood thinners. Brain medicine. The chemical scaffolding holding together whatever was left of Eleanor Matthews. 3 days later, I found them looking at brochures. Glossy pages showing smiling gray-haired people playing cards and doing gentle yoga. Sunset Gardens Assisted Living Community. Golden Years Residences. The euphemisms made my stomach churn. We're just exploring options, Michael said, too quickly. He'd always been a terrible liar, even as a boy. Karen was more direct. Mom, I go back to work next week. You need someone with you during the day. I'm not a child, I managed. No one's saying you are. But her tone said exactly that. But what if you fall? What if there's another stroke? I wanted to tell her that I'd rather risk dying in my own home than live safely in a storage facility for the elderly. But my damaged brain couldn't assemble the words quickly enough, and the moment passed. That night, I lay awake in Karen's guest room, surrounded by boxes of her college textbooks and forgotten exercise equipment. The moonlight cast unfamiliar shadows on the walls. I felt like a ghost haunting someone else's life. For the first time since the stroke, I allowed myself to cry. Not the frustrated tears that came during therapy, but deep, wrenching sobs that left me gasping. I buried my face in the pillow so Karen wouldn't hear. Wouldn't have one more thing to worry about. One more reason to think I couldn't cope. In the morning, my eyes were swollen, but something had shifted inside me. A tiny spark of defiance had ignited. If my life was going to change beyond recognition, it wouldn't be on their terms alone. It would be on mine too, the Rainbow Pines Residence for Active Seniors. That's where they decided to put me. Not consulted me about. Decided. It's the best facility in the area, Mom, Karen said, her voice bright with forced enthusiasm as we drove through the gates. They have physical therapy on-site, daily activities, trained medical staff, and a view of the cemetery. I finished for her, pointing at the wrought iron fence separating the manicured grounds from the graveyard next door. Convenient. Michael, in the back seat, snorted, then quickly covered it with a cough. At least someone appreciated my dark humor. The building itself wasn't terrible. Modern, clean, with wide doorways for wheelchairs and handrails along every wall. The staff smiled too much. Their name tags included their first names in large print, like they were hosting a children's party. Mrs. Matthews. We're so excited to welcome you to our community. This from a woman whose name tag identified her as Heather, Activities Director. She looked about 12 years old to me, though she was probably in her 30s. Let me show you to your apartment. Apartment. A generous term for a bedroom with an attached kitchenette and bathroom. The furniture was obviously new, Karen's doing, I assumed. Nothing from my home. Nothing that held memories or history. We've put you in our gardenia wing, Heather chirped. It's for our most independent residents. You'll have your privacy, but help is just a button press away. She demonstrated the emergency call system with theatrical flourish. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without saying something I'd regret. After the tour, after signing papers that made me feel like I was signing away what remained of my autonomy, after awkward hugs and promises to visit soon, they left. My children drove away, relief visibly loosening their shoulders as the burden of my care transferred to professionals. I sat on the edge of the too-firm mattress, surrounded by beige walls and bland watercolor paintings of flowers, and tried to imagine this as home. A knock on my door interrupted my thoughts. I shuffled over, I was using a cane by then, and opened it to find a tiny woman with a cloud of white hair and the most startlingly bright blue eyes I'd ever seen. New fish, she said without preamble. I'm Edith. They put you in the dead man's room. What? The word came out clearly, shock temporarily bypassing my speech difficulties. Don Walker. Kicked it last month. Heart attack on the bocce ball court. She leaned in conspiratorially. He was sleeping with Margaret in 2A. 92 years old and still getting more action than most of us. I stared at her, not sure whether to be horrified or amused. She misinterpreted my silence. Oh, sorry about that. They warned me you had speech problems. Should I talk slower? She exaggerated the last words comically. I understand, perfectly, I said. Just processing the idea of geriatric love affairs. Edith's laugh was a startling bark of delight. Oh, honey. You have no idea what goes on in this place after the staff goes home. It's like a dorm for wrinkly teenagers. She thrust out a gnarled hand. Come on. I'll introduce you to the troublemakers at dinner. That was how, less than 2 hours after being abandoned in what I'd assumed would be God's waiting room, I found myself at a table with 4 people who would change everything. Don't eat the meatloaf, advised Herbert, a former English professor with a bow tie and persistent tremor. They make it on Mondays and serve it through Wednesday under increasingly creative names. By Thursday it's Southwestern Surprise. The surprise is, you survive, I offered, earning appreciative chuckles from the table. Beside Herbert sat Margot, an elegant black woman who'd been a concert pianist before arthritis gnarled her fingers. The food's not why we're here, anyway, she said, nodding toward a silver-haired man entering the dining room. The real entertainment just arrived. Director Collins, Edith whispered to me. Thinks he's God's gift to senior ladies. Watch how he touches everyone's shoulder as he passes. 3, 2, 1, sure enough, as the director made his rounds, he stopped at our table, placing a proprietary hand on Margot's shoulder. And how are we enjoying dinner tonight, ladies and gentlemen? The Salisbury steak is particularly adventurous, Herbert said dryly. I believe it's attempting to crawl back to the kitchen. Collins forced a laugh. Always the comedian, Professor. His gaze landed on me. And you must be Mrs. Matthews. Settling in well, I hope? If there's anything you need, anything at all, my door is always open. After he moved on, the 4th member of the table, a rail-thin man named Victor who'd been silent until now, murmured, what we need is a new chef in management that doesn't treat us like children at summer camp. Victor's our resident revolutionary, Edith explained. Used to be some big-shot civil rights lawyer. Now he spends his time writing complaint letters about the thermostats. Someone has to, I said, finding myself smiling for what felt like the first time in months. Later, as Edith walked me back to my room, she said something that would echo in my mind for days. Look, Eleanor. This place is what you make it. You can sit in your room waiting to die, or you can join the land of the living. We may be old, but we're not dead yet. Some of us are having the time of our lives. I thought she was exaggerating. I would soon discover she wasn't. The first month passed in a blur of physical therapy, speech exercises, and increasingly less awkward visits from my children. Karen brought flowers every Sunday, guilty offerings placed on my windowsill. Michael came less frequently but stayed longer, filling me in on office gossip and his dating disasters. Neither of them asked if I was happy here. They asked if I was comfortable, if I was getting good care, if I needed anything from the store. The polite questions you ask when you're afraid of the answers. Meanwhile, I was discovering the underground life of Rainbow Pines. It started with a mysterious invitation slipped under my door, library. 9 p.m. Password, Hemingway. Curious and, frankly, bored out of my mind after a day of patronizing group activities, I made my way to the small library on the 2nd floor. At precisely 9, I knocked on the closed door. Password, came a voice I recognized as Herbert's. Hemingway, I whispered, feeling ridiculous and oddly exhilarated. The door opened to reveal not just Herbert, but Edith, Margot, Victor, and 3 other residents I'd seen around but hadn't met. On the central table, someone had placed a bottle of bourbon and several glasses. Welcome to the Dead Poets Society, Herbert said with a theatrical bow. Where we drink prohibited alcohol and read things that would make Director Collins clutch his pearls. We take turns choosing the readings, Margot explained, helping me to a chair. Tonight is Edith's choice. Edith grinned wickedly. Bukowski. And so I found myself, at 58, drinking smuggled bourbon with a group of septuagenarians and octogenarians while Herbert, with his professor's voice, read aloud from poems that would indeed have scandalized the administration. Poems about sex and death and the raw, messy business of being human. When it was over, as we carefully removed all evidence of our gathering, Victor said quietly, "Same time next week." George's choice. Georgia, a former librarian with a pixie cut and hearing aids, smiled. Anais Nin. I went back to my room that night feeling something I hadn't felt since before the stroke, like a person with a future, not just a past. Your progress is remarkable, Mrs. Matthews, my speech therapist said during our 6th week of sessions. Your aphasia has improved significantly. What she didn't know was that I'd been practicing extra hours with Herbert, who approached language therapy with the same exacting standards he'd applied to freshman composition for 40 years. Again, he'd insist when I stumbled over a difficult phrase. Precision matters. The world judges us by our words, especially at our age. They're looking for any excuse to dismiss us. My physical therapy was going well too, thanks in part to Victor, who had taught me a modified version of Tai Chi that we practiced at dawn in the small courtyard. Balance comes from the center, he'd say, demonstrating movements that looked deceptively simple. The body follows the mind. I still had weakness on my right side. I still sometimes searched for words that should have been readily available. But I was improving in ways the clinical measurements couldn't capture. I was alive again. The realization hit me one Tuesday afternoon as I helped Margot arrange flowers for the common room, my hand steady enough now for such tasks. I was laughing at something she'd said about her third husband when it struck me. I hadn't thought about my old life, my pre-stroke existence, for days. What's wrong? Margot asked, noticing my sudden silence. I think I'm happy, I said, the words both simple and revolutionary. She considered this, then nodded. That happens sometimes. When you least expect it. Later that night, I called Karen. When she answered, the surprise in her voice was evident. I rarely initiated calls, usually waiting for her scheduled check-ins. Is everything okay, Mom? Yes, I said, my speech clearer than she'd heard it since the stroke. I'm writing a poem. A bewildered pause. A poem? For the Dead Poets Society. I didn't explain further. And I'm learning Tai Chi. Another pause. That's great, Mom. The activities there sound nice. She didn't understand. How could she? She still saw me as diminished, as less than. A puzzle she'd successfully solved by finding the right facility. Karen, I said carefully, making sure each word was distinct, I need some things from my house. What things? My notebooks. The ones in my bedside table. And my fountain pens. The blue one especially. Before the stroke, I'd dabbled in writing, nothing serious, just thoughts and observations, the occasional poem. It had been a private pleasure, one I'd nearly forgotten in the chaos of my medical crisis. I'll look for them, she promised, confusion still evident in her voice when they arrived 3 days later, brought by a perplexed Michael. Karen said you wanted your old journals. I felt like I was reuniting with a part of myself I'd abandoned that night, with a familiar pen in my hand, gripped differently now, adapted to my new limitations. I began to write again. Not about my old life, but about this strange new one. About Edith's irreverent wisdom and Herbert's passionate recitations. About Victor's quiet dignity and Margot's resilient grace and, for the first time, about the stroke itself. About waking up to find half my body had betrayed me. About the terror and grief and, eventually, acceptance. When I finished, tears stained the page, but they weren't tears of sorrow. You did what? Karen's voice echoed through my small apartment, loud enough that I was sure Edith next door could hear every word. Started a writing group, I repeated calmly. For residents to share stories. Mom, you can barely, she stopped herself, but I knew what she'd been about to say. You can barely talk. You can barely write. You can barely function. I can barely what? I challenged, my voice steady despite the extra effort it took. She had the grace to look ashamed. I just meant it sounds like a lot of work. It was work. Everything was work now. Buttoning a shirt. Writing a sentence. Making myself understood. But it was work that mattered. The administration approved it, I said, not mentioning that Director Collins had initially dismissed the idea until Margot had reminded him that her nephew was on the state board that regulated senior living facilities. Well, that's great, I guess. Karen looked around my small space, her eyes landing on the changes I'd made over the past 2 months. The watercolors had been replaced with photographs, some from my old home that Michael had brought, others new ones taken at Dead Poets gatherings and Tai Chi sessions. My notebooks were stacked on the small desk that now occupied one corner. A potted herb garden, Edith's idea, sat on the windowsill. "You've made it homey," she said, and I could tell she was trying to be supportive, even if she didn't understand. "It is home," I said simply. "For now." Her expression flickered with something, relief? Guilt, before she composed herself. "I'm glad, Mom." "Really?" After she left, I joined the others in the common room for our weekly writing session. We'd grown from the original Dead Poets core to include a dozen residents, each with stories that might otherwise have gone untold. Today, it was George's turn to share. She adjusted her hearing aids and began reading from a spiral notebook. "I was 19 when I fell in love with a woman for the first time." She started, her voice gaining strength as she continued. We listened, rapt, as she shared a story she'd kept hidden for most of her life, about secret love in the 1950s, about choices made and paths not taken, about the marriage that had been a refuge of sorts but never her true desire. When she finished, there was a moment of profound silence before Herbert reached over and squeezed her hand. "Thank you," he said simply. Later, as we were gathering our papers, Georgia approached me. "I never told anyone that story before. Not in 82 years. Why now?" I asked. She gestured around the room, at our unlikely collection of friends. "Because what am I saving it for? The grave?" Her laugh was both bitter and free. "Besides, Eleanor, you showed us it's never too late to start a new chapter." I didn't feel like I'd shown anyone anything. I was just surviving, adapting, finding my way through a life I hadn't chosen. But looking at George's face, seeing the peace thereafter unburdening a lifetime secret, I wondered if maybe that was enough. The day everything changed, again, was ordinary in every way. 6 months after my arrival at Rainbow Pines, 4 months after the formation of our writing group, 2 months after I'd graduated from needing a cane, I was in the garden, helping Victor plant autumn flowers. My right hand was still weaker than my left, but I'd developed workarounds, ways of bracing and steadying that let me do most things. "The mums look beautiful," I said, admiring the riot of orange and yellow blooms. Victor nodded, his movements economical as he dug another hole. "Nature doesn't care if we're old or sick. It just keeps cycling through the seasons." A staff member, one of the younger caregivers, whose name escaped me, approached us. "Mrs. Matthews? You have visitors in the main lobby." Karen and Michael weren't due until Sunday. Curious, I brushed soil from my pants and made my way inside. They were waiting by the reception desk, both of them, looking strangely formal. Karen in what I recognized as her courtroom suit, Michael uncomfortably clean-shaven. "What's happened?" I asked immediately, fear clutching at me. In my experience, unscheduled visits usually meant bad news. "Nothing bad, Mom," Michael assured me quickly. "But we need to talk to you. Privately." In my apartment, they perched awkwardly on the edge of my small sofa while I took my usual chair by the window. "We've sold the house," Karen said without preamble. "The house." "My house." The one I'd been told was being taken care of. "When?" The word came out sharper than I'd intended. "The closing was yesterday," Michael said. "It was the right time, market-wise." I looked from one to the other, these adults who had once been the children I'd raised, now making decisions about my life without consulting me. "The money will be put into a trust," Karen continued, slipping into her lawyer voice. "For your ongoing care." It's the responsible thing to do, especially with healthcare costs being what they are. My money, I said, each word precise. My house. Mom, you're not in a position to, not in a position? I interrupted, feeling heat rise to my face. Because I had a stroke? Because I speak slowly? That means I can't make decisions? Michael at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. We should have discussed it with you first. I told Karen that. Karen's face hardened slightly. The power of attorney you signed in the hospital gives us emergency powers, I finished for her. Not the right to sell my home without even telling me. It's done, Mom, she said with finality. And it's for the best. You're settled here. You're safe. The money will ensure you have the best care for the rest of your life. The rest of my life. The phrase hung in the air between us, heavy with assumptions about how much life I had left, and what quality it might be. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw something I hadn't noticed before. Fear. Not just for me, but of me. Of what I represented, vulnerability, mortality, the fragility of the human body. By controlling my circumstances, she was attempting to control her own fears. I want a copy of all paperwork, I said finally. And I want my legal power of attorney revoked. Karen's eyes widened. Mom, that's not necessary. We're just trying to protect me. I know. I took a deliberate breath. But I don't need protection. I need respect. After they left, Karen bristling with indignation, Michael promising to email me the documentation, I sat at my window for a long time, watching the sun set over the cemetery next door. I should have been angry. Maybe I was, somewhere beneath the surface. But mostly, I felt a strange sense of clarity. They'd taken my house, thinking they were securing my future. What they'd actually done was free me from my past, with nothing left to lose. I could become anyone I wanted. You should sue them, Victor said flatly when I told the dead poets about the house. We were in our usual spot in the library, bourbon replaced tonight with a surprisingly decent Merlot smuggled in by Margot's daughter. No, I said, the word coming easily now. My speech had improved to the point where only when I was tired or upset did the aphasia return in force. They're still my children. Children who sold your house out from under you, Edith pointed out, pouring me another glass of wine. What would you do with a house, anyway? Herbert asked pragmatically. Live alone with your walker and emergency button? I smiled at his bluntness. 6 months ago, such a comment would have devastated me. Now I could see the caring beneath the sharp words. Exactly, I agreed. The house is gone. But the money, that's another matter. Over the next week, with Herbert's help crafting precisely worded emails and Victor's knowledge of legal matters, I began the process of reclaiming control of my finances. It wasn't easy. Karen fought me every step of the way, convinced she was protecting me from myself. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, during one of Michael's visits. She's not doing this to hurt you, he said as we walked slowly around the grounds. She's terrified of losing you. By controlling me, she controls her fear, I replied, an insight I'd reached during our writing sessions, where I'd been exploring my complicated feelings about my daughter. Michael nodded. After Dad left, you became her rock. Seeing you vulnerable, it shook her foundation. I considered this. And you? He shrugged, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. I've always known I couldn't control anything. That's why I'm the family screw-up, remember? I stopped walking and turned to face him. You're not a screw-up, Michael. You're the honest one. Something in his expression shifted, a shadow lifting. I'll talk to Karen. About the trust. Make her see reason. 2 weeks later, we reached a compromise. The trust would remain, but with modifications giving me significant control over the funds. And, more importantly, Karen agreed to attend a family counseling session with the facility's therapist, where we began the difficult process of redrawing boundaries. I'm not the same person I was before the stroke, I told her during one particularly emotional session. but different doesn't mean diminished. Slowly, painfully, she began to understand. On the 1-year anniversary of my stroke, we held a party. Not to commemorate the event itself, there was nothing celebratory about that day, but to mark a year of survival, of adaptation, of unexpected new beginnings. The dead poets were there, of course, along with others from our expanded writing group. Karen came, bringing a cake she'd baked herself, a peace offering of sorts. Michael arrived with his new girlfriend, a soft-spoken librarian who asked thoughtful questions and didn't flinch when I occasionally stumbled over words. Director Collins made an appearance, congratulating me on my remarkable recovery and reminding everyone that Rainbow Pines offered the very best in therapeutic programming. Herbert rolled his eyes so dramatically behind the director's back that Margot had to fake a coughing fit to cover her laughter. Later, as the party wound down, Edith pulled me aside. "We have something for you." She handed me a small wrapped package. Inside was a book, professionally bound, with a simple title on the cover, Second Bloom, Stories from Rainbow Pines. "Open it," Edith urged. I did, finding a collection of the pieces from our writing group, arranged by theme rather than author. My own words were interspersed with Herbert's precise prose, George's brave confessionals, Victor's political commentaries, and dozens of other voices that might otherwise have gone unheard. "We sent it to my grandson's publishing company," Margot explained, appearing at my elbow. "It's not exactly a bestseller, but they printed 100 copies. For the library," Herbert added. "And for families. So they can see that we're still here," Victor finished. "Still thinking. Still creating." I ran my fingers over the embossed cover, speechless in a way that had nothing to do with aphasia. That night, after everyone had gone and I was alone in my small apartment, I opened the book again and found the piece I'd written about my stroke, about waking up to a ceiling I didn't recognize, about the long journey back to myself, a different self, but no less valuable. The last paragraph read, "They say lightning never strikes twice in the same place. But people aren't places. We can be struck down repeatedly, by illness, by loss, by betrayal, by age itself, and still find the strength to stand again. Different, perhaps. Scarred, certainly. But with roots deep enough to weather any storm, and the remarkable capacity to bloom again in unexpected seasons." I closed the book and looked out my window at the cemetery next door. No longer a reminder of death, but of the precious impermanence of life. Of the need to live fully in whatever time remains, whatever body houses us. Tomorrow, I would start a new notebook. Begin a new story. Not despite what had happened to me, but because of it. After all, there's nothing quite like a stroke to remind you that every heartbeat is a gift, unwrapped one precarious day at a time. When my daughter visits now, she doesn't cut my food anymore. Instead, she asks what I'm writing. What mischief the dead poets have gotten into. What I want, not what she thinks I need. It's not perfect. Nothing is after a storm passes through your life, uprooting what you thought was permanent. But in the broken places, new things grow. Different things. Sometimes, better things. I am 59 years old. Half my body still betrays me sometimes. Words still occasionally hide from me when I need them most. But I am more alive now than I was before the ceiling changed. If you're listening to this, if my story has found its way to you, remember, it's never too late for a second bloom. Even in the most unlikely soil. Even after the harshest winter, especially then.